Timothy Burns, or Tim to his buddies, checked his phone after leaving a voicemail for Candace, or Candy as she preferred to be called. She was his wife of 5 years. He had just sealed the deal on a service contract with a big company based in California that had offices all over the country. He knew his boss, Jake Hudson, would be thrilled because the new contract meant a major boost for his IT company. Not to mention, it also meant a big raise for him. Maybe now, he thought, he and Candy could finally start a family together. He had a plan, but he started getting worried after camping with Jake a week ago. There was something off about her when they got back from the trip. She seemed distracted and was snapping at him more than usual. And that's not all. When they got home and threw their clothes in the laundry, he found something in the crotch of her panties. He woke up and realized that whatever it was had already dried up and smelled really bad. It suddenly hit him and he felt like his whole world was falling apart. He promised himself to uncover the truth and knew he would have to travel to the West Coast. So, he went to see a lawyer to figure out what he could do if his wife, Candy, was cheating. He feared it would mean the end of their marriage. "Are you really sure your wife is cheating on you?" asked Ruby Hawkins, a lawyer who focused on family law and divorce and was suggested by a friend. "Alright, so this dude just split up with his wife because she was cheating, or at least that's what he thinks. He wants to make sure, and if it's true, he wants a divorce." Ruby said most divorces in this state happen without blaming anyone, but you could file for divorce because of adultery if you have solid proof. Tim asked if that meant like photos or videos, and Ruby said yes. She offered to get an investigator to tail her and confirm it. Tim agreed and asked what to expect during the divorce, considering they both make about the same amount of money. "If you quit your teaching job, there's a chance we can help you avoid paying any child support." Ruby mentioned that you don't own any property and don't have kids, so basically it will be divided 50-50ths. You get to keep your pension and she keeps hers. It's basically a fair split of assets. If she cheats on you, we'll use that as leverage and gather evidence to get a favorable outcome. I'll get started on the paperwork and we'll send it once we have the evidence. Alright, so Tim was like, let's do it. He's gonna be out of town for like 3 days, so that's when she's probably gonna do it. She called her investigator, Marvin Johnson, and he told Tim to put a tracking app on her phone. He also gave Tim a device to record phone calls on his landline and an audio recorder that he hid in her purse. Tim didn't like doing all this sneaky stuff, but he had to find out the truth. There were other signs too, like after they went camping, Jakey was acting even more cocky and rude than usual. It was like he knew something. Tim couldn't last a week without her and Candy gave him a ride to the airport. They kissed goodbye and he said he'd call her after dinner. "Okay, honey," she replied, wishing him a safe flight. The first night Tim was gone, he called Candy like he said he would. He was surprised when she told him she was working as a waitress at a party Jake was throwing at his place that night. Candy said one of the waitresses was sick and Jake asked if she could step in. He didn't know that Jake had any plans for her because he didn't say anything. "He promised to give me $150 for tonight. Candy said I could use some extra cash since I won't be working again for a couple of weeks. He knew classes would start up soon and she could really use some extra money. But something didn't feel right about it, really." Tim asked, "Okay, go ahead, but be careful and tell me about it tomorrow, okay?" "Okay," she said. "You know that I love you, right?" "Yes," he said. "And I love you too." "Good." That night, he wrapped up the conversation, but he started feeling a knot in his stomach. He called the investigator and said, "I just wanted to give you a heads up that Candy was asked to waitress at a party at Jake Hudson's house." Tim replied, "Okay," said Marvin, "we did it. I'll send you all the details we uncover." "Thanks," Tim said, ending the call. The next day, he tried calling Candy on her cell, but she didn't pick up. He also tried her home phone, but only got her answering machine. Obviously, she didn't spend the night with Jake. Tim was thinking to himself, but his hopes were crushed when he got an email from Marvin that day. The email said that Candy spent the night at Hudson's house and was still there. Marvin mentioned that Candy was very busy the night before and attached a couple of photos, warning Tim that they were pretty explicit. Marvin promised to give Tim a full report when he returned. Tim opened the attachments and felt his heart sink. His wife, whom he had been living with for 5 years, was there in the photos having sex with 3 men. When Marvin saw on the tracker that Candy's phone was still at Jake's house, he knew she was probably still there. He tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail. He even tried calling his home phone, but all he got was an answering machine. He didn't leave a message and instead went to the hotel bar to drown his sorrows. The next morning, he confirmed his assumption with Marvin. So, he got an email with 2 more pics of his wife. Same type of pics as before, but this time with 10 dudes in them, including Jake, his son Mike, and 5 other guys from Jake's IT company. He used to think they were all trustworthy co-workers, but not anymore. He didn't know who the other 3 guys were, figured they were probably Mike's buddies. After finishing up business with the client in California, he checked out of the hotel, caught an early flight home, and hopped in a taxi. So, Tim was at the airport and saw that Candy's car was gone when he got back home. He checked the tracker and saw that her phone was still at Jake's house. He went inside, changed his clothes, and called Ruby's office. He was shocked when her receptionist said she was free and could meet him in the afternoon. He called Candy on her cell phone and was surprised when she picked up, sounding out of breath. "Hello," she said. "Hi, it's me, Tim," he replied. "Where are you?" "I'm at home, just finishing up a few things." Before class starts, she told him that she was shocked that she had lied to him so blatantly. He replied, "I see. Well, I'm done here in California and I'm heading home," he said. "Oh, okay," she responded. "I missed you so much, call me when you land and I'll pick you up at the airport." "No, don't worry," he said. "I'll take a taxi. Bye." He ended the conversation and wondered if she noticed that he didn't tell her that he loved her or that they would see each other later. Shaking his head, he left the house and went to visit Ruby. Candy looked at him. After Tim hung up the phone, he always used to say, "I love you," before ending the call. But this time, he didn't. In fact, she could tell his tone wasn't very friendly. She had planned to go back home after the first night, but being in bed naked between Jake and his son felt too good to leave. She felt like she deserved it. She thought it would all end once classes started again, and Tim would never find out. So she ended up spending the next day and night with Jake and his son, Mike. On the second day, Jake went too. She was supposed to work for a few hours, but Mike kept her busy and even hooked her up with some of his buddies. When Jake got back home, she was getting it on with Mike in Jake's own bed. After they were done, Jake sat up and gave her a sly smile. "Maybe I should send your husband away more often," he said. "You know my classes are starting up again soon," she replied. "I won't be around for a week." "I wouldn't dare mess around like this while he's still here," she added. "Why not?" Jake asked. Maybe he'd actually enjoy a change. Jake and Mike were cracking up when she mentioned how real men treat her. "Well, I had a blast," she admitted. "But I still love Tim and I don't want to hurt him." "Well, maybe I can arrange for him to be out of town for the weekend," Jake suggested. "That way, you can come and hang out with us at the house." "That sounds kinda sketchy," she replied. "But he's gonna figure it out eventually. Tim's not stupid, you know." "Don't worry," Jake reassured her, grabbing his video camera. "I'll take care of Timmy boy. There's just one thing." "What's that?" she asked. Jake told her, "I don't want you hooking up with him anymore." "You're with us now, got it?" She asked, "But how do I do that?" Jake replied, "Just make up an excuse, like say you have a headache or something. You'll figure it out." She agreed, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." Later that day, some of Mike's buddies came over and got to try Candy's goods. Jake even brought in a few single guys from the group. She was officially part of the crew now and having a great time. Tim was totally surprised when he saw all the evidence Marvin had. So, he found some DVDs of videos of his wife doing some freaky stuff with other guys, stuff she'd never do with him. His love for her went down the drain after seeing all that. Ruby tried to comfort him, but it was no use. How could she just change like that after 5 years? He felt betrayed and wondered what he did to deserve it. And what about Jake, who he thought was a friend? Now he knows better. He's gonna go ahead and file for divorce. Ruby wants a divorce from Jake because he cheated on her. She's thinking about suing him and his buddies for messing up their relationship. Tim's okay with it as long as she doesn't get into trouble. Ruby doesn't want to bail him out of jail. Tim assures her he won't do anything dumb. She's ready to prepare the paperwork and ship it out in a few days. In the meantime, just act normal around your wife. I'm not a great actor, Tim told her. I'll never touch her again. Who knows what she got from all those other guys? Tell her you're not feeling well, Ruby suggested. That should give you some time. Tim nodded in agreement. Okay, he said before leaving. As he sat in his car, he suddenly had another realization. There was no way he could work for Jake again, and he couldn't stand the thought of other men being around who might cheat with his wife. He took out his phone and started scrolling through it. He kept scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he wanted. He dialed the number and crossed his fingers. Carlson, said the man on the other end of the line when he answered. John, this is Tim Burns, Tim said. Tim. How are you, old friend? Asked John. It could have been better, said Tim. Listen, is that job at Empire still open? John, the CEO of Empire, had been trying to get Tim on board for a while now. But Tim felt like he needed to stick with Jake out of loyalty. However, now there's no sign of that loyalty left. Of course it is, said John. Have you finally decided to join us? Tim said he had to leave his job at a good company because of some stuff that didn't sit right with him. JN was sympathetic and asked if there was anything he could do to help, and Tim straight up asked for a job. He promised to work just as hard as he did for his old boss, Jake. JN agreed to give him a shot and told him to start on Monday. Tim was thrilled and JN suggested they come over for dinner that night to try Rose's famous lasagna and talk about pay. I'd love to bring the package with you, but I can't come. My wife said so, Tim told John when asked what's going on. I really don't want to talk about it over the phone, Tim added. I can talk more about it tonight if you want, Tim offered. Sure, Tim, John said with concern. You know, Rose is a counselor. Maybe she can help you out if you want. That actually sounds good, John. I appreciate it, Tim replied. Okay, I'll call Rose and let her know. Can you come in around 6:30 p.m.? Sure thing, Tim said at 6:30 today. Thanks again, buddy, John replied. They wrapped up the conversation and Tim felt like a huge weight was lifted off his shoulders. He hopped in the car and drove home, only to find out that Candy still hadn't come back from Jake's place. Tim grabbed his briefcase and went inside, took a shower, changed clothes, and sat down at the computer to write his resignation letter. Candy finally showed up around 5 p.m. She saw her husband on the computer and went to give him a kiss, but he turned away so she ended up kissing his cheek. Surprised, she asked if everything was okay. Not really, he replied. I'm not feeling well, maybe it's jet lag or something. I'll crash on the futon when I get back tonight. Will you be back? She asked. Where are you going? He replied, I'm meeting someone for dinner. Are you seeing another woman? She asked, with concern in her voice. You mean, am I cheating on you? He asked. No, I never cheated on you, he reassured her. We've been together for a while now, and I have no plans to change that. Can you say the same? She was shocked. Does he know? She wondered. No, he couldn't possibly know. Of course I can, she replied confidently. Tim wasn't convinced. So, how was your trip to California? She asked, trying to shift the focus. It was good, he replied. How did your job at Jake's house go? She asked. It was fine, she said. Even though it was tough, it was still enjoyable. I bet, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He glanced at his watch before speaking. Guess I'll head out again, he said before saving his work and shutting down the computer. He got up, walked by her without saying anything, and went to the master bedroom to change into something less casual. When he came back out, Candy was sitting on the couch. How long you gonna be gone? She asked. I don't know, he replied. Don't wait up for me. Bye. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door. She couldn't help but notice that he didn't kiss her or say he loved her, like he always did when he left. As soon as she saw his car leaving the house, she grabbed her landline and called Jake, not realizing that their conversation was being recorded. Jake, I think he's onto something, she said. What makes you say that? Jake asked. He didn't even touch me, she replied. Normally he always kisses me and tells me he loves me, but this time he was so distant. He just left, saying he had a dinner appointment. Did he say with who? Jake inquired. No, he didn't, she confirmed. What if he knows? What if he's planning to leave me, she worried. So what if he does, Jake reassured her. Jake smiled and said, you can always crash at our place, and don't stress about Timmy. I'll make sure he's out and about so much, he'll hardly be home. Candy exclaimed, I love him. Ja laughed and said, you've really shown us how much you love him these past 2 days, haven't you? Jake asked, it's not funny, Jake. She replied, I know what I did to you guys, and yeah, I enjoyed it. But I still love him. I don't want to lose him. Jake nodded and said, exactly. Let him come to terms with it in his own time. He's gonna come on board, and if he doesn't, well, we can deal with that too. You're not gonna hurt him, are you? She asked. Jake replied, not many words. We just gotta show him how things are gonna be from now on, and you're gonna help make it happen. What? Candy asked in shock. When the time comes, you'll help us explain everything to him. Remember, you belong to us now. I'm sure you wouldn't want the school board to see the video footage we have of you. You wouldn't dare, Candy said. Oh, yeah, but I'd love to, Jake replied. I told you I have a video of you hiking and tons of videos of you in some really awkward positions. Your ass is basically mine now, so you better make sure little Timmy behaves. Candy caved in and gave up. Okay, Jake, she said. But don't hurt him, Jake chuckled on the phone. Yes, whatever you say, he said, ending the conversation. Tim pulled up to the big 2-story house where John and Rose Carlson lived. He got out of the car, carrying a bottle of wine he had grabbed on the way. John opened the door as Tim rang the bell, welcoming him graciously. Tim grinned and accepted the wine John offered. Thanks, this will definitely come in handy tonight, he said. John led Tim to the dining room where Rose was already waiting with her famous lasagna. Tim, meet my wife Rose, John introduced. Tim shook Rose's hand as John popped open a bottle of wine. Nice to meet you, Tim, Rose said with a smile. I'm glad to meet you too, Mrs. Carlson, Tim replied. Please, call me Rose, she insisted. Mrs. Carlson sounds too formal. They all took their seats at the table. Table and Rose dished out some bomb lasagna on plates, while John poured the wine. Tim couldn't believe how tasty the lasagna was and thanked them, saying it was the best he's ever had. Rose replied, I'm glad you enjoy it. This is one of my specialties. Then, Tim got real nosy and asked why he broke up with Jake so fast. John chimed in, yeah, spill the tea, Tim. Tim hesitated before finally opening up, something went down, guys. Something happened. John nodded in understanding and urged Tim to spill the beans. Rose was like, Tim, hold up a sec before you spill the tea on John's wild story. That shit gave me chills, I feel for you men. I've been through something kinda similar, but totally different circumstances. So, what's the plan now? Besides quitting your job, have you talked to a lawyer yet? Tim replied, yeah, I've already seen a lawyer and I'm filing for divorce. My lawyer says it'll be a pretty fair split. Rose was like, have you thought about counseling though? This situation is getting out of hand. Tim sighed, I don't know what happened to Candy, it's like she totally changed her attitude out of nowhere. I never expected her to have the guts to do that. Rose asked me how I'm handling all of this, and I said not too great. My lawyer thinks I should act normal around Candy, but it's tough for me right now. I can't even stand to look at her. Rose suggested I see a therapist, but I told her I can handle it. John reassured me that Rose is top-notch and can help me get through this. Plus, it's covered in my benefits package, so that's a bonus for sure. Tim said, laughing, I'm serious. John replied, Rose was a lifesaver when I needed her. I know she can help you too. He then turned to Rose and asked, can you fit it into your schedule? Rose confidently replied, of course. I think an hour a week should do the trick. Tim pondered the proposal before finally agreeing, okay, I'll do it. John smiled and praised Tim, saying, a good man. He assured Tim that he would make time for consultations with Rose and asked him to keep him updated on their progress. Tim agreed, saying, "I'll do that." "Thanks," Tim said. "Now, if you don't mind, honey, Tim and I are gonna go to my office to chat about his new job," JN said. "I don't mind at all," she replied with a smile. "And I'm excited to work with you too, Tim." "Thank you," Tim said, standing next to JN. They went to John's home office where he poured them each a glass of brandy. They spent the next 2 hours talking about his new job. By the time they were done, Tim felt like he was back in control of his life. Tim shook John's hand and headed home. Around 10 o'clock at night when Tim got home, he checked out the scene and noticed the lights were still on. He was hoping Candy was home alone. He parked the car, walked inside, and found Candy chilling on the couch. "So, how did your little meeting go?" she asked. "Very good, thank you," Tim replied. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna hit the hay. Good night." He headed to the spare room where his computer was, started getting undressed. "Are you crashing here tonight?" Candy called out from the doorway. "Yeah," Tim confirmed. "I'm still not ready to leave. Feeling good, so I'm gonna crash on the futon. This an issue?" "Nah, I don't think so. She just mentioned that you've been away for 3 days and she was hoping we could hang out a bit, you know." "I'm not feeling it today," Tim said. In fact, the idea of touching her right now made him sick. "All right," she said quietly. "Maybe tomorrow." "I don't know," he said. "We'll see." She nodded and turned away, wondering if he even knew what she'd been up to lately. The next day, he woke up before Candy snatched. He wrote his resignation letter and made himself a cup of coffee. He spotted Candy's purse on the kitchen table and grabbed the audio recorder. He downloaded the recording of yesterday's phone call. Without saying goodbye or expressing his love for Candy, he left the apartment. She heard the door shut as he walked out and went to bed. Tears streamed down her face. When he arrived at the office, he hardly spoke to anyone. He said hi to his secretary, then entered his office and shut the door. He started packing his things when Jake strolled into his office and was like, "What's this?" Tim dug into his briefcase and whipped out 2 envelopes. "One's a signed contract from California," he said, "and the other is my resignation, effective immediately. I think you owe me a bonus for scoring that California deal, plus my final paycheck and vacation time." Jake was shook and asked, "What the hell, why are you ditching us?" "I really need you, man." Tim shot back, "You seriously don't know? Do you think I'm dumb or something? You know that's not the case. Hey, to be real with you, some stuff went down that made me realize I can't stay here anymore. So, I found a new job and I'm out of here in a few." When I went to HR, Tim was like, "Nah, we ain't talking about it. He said he's done and that's it. I thought we were friends, but you went and messed things up and screwed up my marriage. You can find someone else to do your dirty work. That's what it's all about, huh, Jake? Well, just so you know. Hey man, I know your wife was totally down to hook up with me. Don't let this mess up your career. Just go with the flow for a bit and let Candy have her fun. When she's done, she'll be back to you. And do you really think I would go along with something like that? By the way, how long have you been fooling around with her?" The first time was at the campsite. Jake mentioned it on the second day when you guys were skiing. "And just so you know, she was all over me that day and even said I'm bigger than you. She was practically begging me to hook up right then and there." Tim never says no to a good time, but he just couldn't seal the deal this time. He couldn't even explain why. And Candy didn't say a word about it. "This was right around the time you conveniently kicked me out to handle some business at the office, right, Tim? You just wanted me out of the picture so you could get busy with my wife, huh?" Jake grinned and nodded. "So, what's the plan, Tim? You're not done yet? And what's with this whole idea of hiring her as a waitress at your place? The party was just a way to get her in bed, right?" Tim asked. "Yeah, it was," Jake replied. "So what?" Tim then pulled out his phone and stopped the recording he had started when Jake walked in. "Thanks for admitting it," Tim said. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm finished here. I'm heading to HR and won't bother you anymore." "Wait," Jake said. You can't use that recording against me. We'll see, Tim replied. I'm outta here. Goodbye, Jake. You're going to hell. Hold up, you forgot something, Jake said, picking up a photo of Candy that Tim had. So Tim just left the office after saying he's done with us and Candy. Jake was left wondering what the hell just went down. How did Tim find out about what we did to Candy? Candy asked what he meant by resigning, and Jake told her he just handed in his resignation letter and left. Man, Candy knows everything. I don't know how, but he knows. What did you tell him? She asked. The truth, said Jake. I told him about our first time on the hike. You're a fool, she exclaimed. Well, he asked and I told him, Jake said. He also left a photo of you on his desk, which she kept. He said he didn't need it. Wow, she said, tears rolling down her face. So, what do we do now? She asked. Not my problem, Jake said. He's your husband, you can handle this. Unless you want me to step in, of course. Tell him he's wrong and needs to change his ways, she said. No, she said, you've already done too much. Just stay away. I'll handle it. Fine, he replied before hanging up. Candy stared at her phone, tears streaming down her face. She didn't want a divorce, but she knew Tim wouldn't put up with her cheating. She decided she would do whatever it takes to keep him. She sat on the sofa, head in hands, sobbing over her mistake. A few minutes later, Tim pulled into the driveway, spotting Candy's car. He looked around to see if Jake's car was nearby, but didn't see it. He grabbed his stuff and went inside. He saw Candy on the couch and without saying anything, went into his office. He closed and locked the door, then checked for any voice recordings. He found one and listened to the conversation between Candy and Jake. He sent it to his lawyer and quickly called her. Hey Tim, she said. I just got your email. I'm working on your documents now. Okay, Tim said. When can they be submitted? If you want, I can submit them now. I can make some calls and my guy will bring them over later today, she said. Will that work for you? Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, he said. After hanging up, he went to his gun safe, grabbed his old .45 caliber pistol. He didn't plan on using it, but he wanted to be prepared in case Jake or Candy caused any trouble. He walked into the kitchen, set his briefcase on the table, and looked at Candy. We need to talk, he said, placing the gun on the table within reach. Is this really necessary? She asked. He asked, pointing at the gun, I hope not. He replied, I just want to make sure in case your lover decides to break in here. My lover, she asked. Don't play dumb, he said. I'm not in the mood for your games. Now sit down, we need to discuss something. She sat down, scared, not knowing what her husband was going to do. First things first, Tim said. Later today, someone will come by and give you the papers. Candy recoiled in shock. Divorce, she asked. Why? I don't want a divorce, I love you, Tim said. I know everything about you, Jake, his son, and everyone else. You've been having a blast lately, so I decided to divorce you for cheating. She asked, you don't have any proof of that. Tim just smiled and pulled out an envelope. He showed her several photos with timestamps, all clearly showing her getting it on with different guys, including Jake. I also have video and audio, Tim said. Want to watch? She shook her head, knowing she was caught. Okay, he said, considering the circumstances, I was more than fair. No alimony, you get half. Translation, so, I checked the bank account and we both get to keep our pensions. You can take all your stuff, I've already paid and cancelled your credit card. I have a check for half of what's left for you. Oh, and there's a restraining order saying you have to stay at least 150 meters away from me, my home, and my job. You have some time to pack up your things before you get served with the papers. Are you kicking me out? She asked, tears streaming down her face. That's about it, he replied. But what if I decide to stay? Fight the divorce she wanted, Tim chuckled. I don't think that's a good idea, he said. Imagine if some of those pics and vids were to magically surface. Do you think the school board or the parents of your students would want you teaching their kids? I don't think so. You wouldn't dare, she exclaimed. Are you willing to risk it? Tim asked. Candy looked down for a moment before shaking her head. No way, she said. I need this job. Exactly, Tim replied. That's how it's gonna be. So, there's a few more things you gotta know, she said sadly. You'll have to give up your rings and stop using my last name, he replied. Oh my God, you've turned into a heartless jerk, haven't you? She asked as she took off her rings. Well, you gave me a damn good reason, Tim retorted. I just want to know one thing, what happened? What made you go from a loving wife to a total mess? She looked down before answering. It happened on the second day of our hike. So I was on the boat and chilling in the tent when Jake came by and caught me in my birthday suit. I was just trying to relax when he walked in and seemed a bit awkward about seeing me but naked. We started chatting and then he decided to drop true, and that was it. So he drops his pants and you pounce on him right away. Tim said. And just like that, you're a traitor. How many times did you hook up with him on that trip? Twice, she admitted. First time was when we were jet skiing, and the second. Back in the day, when Jake sent you back to the office, Tim shook his head and pointed at the photos. I see none of your flings were using protection, he said. Weren't you worried about getting knocked up or catching something? I'm still on the pill, she replied. That doesn't mean you can't still get pregnant, Tim warned. And you can still get sick. Is this really what you wanted? Oh God, no, she said. Tim shook his head. You know, the whole time we were together, I was constantly bothered by other women. Who do you think you are, looking like goddesses, he said. I turned them all down, you know why? Because I thought I had a loving and loyal wife at home, and I would never do anything to hurt her. But you didn't even care about how I felt. I hope whatever you did was worth it. Now, pack up your stuff. I expect you to leave when you get served with the papers. Tim, please, she started. Can't we go see a therapist or something? I swear, I'll never do this again. Can't you forgive me just this once? I promise, I'll never. I can't forgive you for what you did, Tim said, his expression harsher than she had ever seen before. Maybe if you slipped up once and were drugged or something, I might not pay attention to it. But that didn't happen. From the moment Jakey pulled his pants down, you were his willing toy. I can never forgive this level of betrayal. Don't you love me enough to get through this? She asked. He shook his head. No, I can't stand the sight of you right now, he said. The sooner you. It's best for you to disappear from my life now. Go and start getting everything ready. Whatever you leave behind will either be burned, thrown away, or donated to Goodwill. Sobbing, she got up and went to the master bedroom to pack her things. Tim watched as Candy pulled out one full garbage bag after another. She stopped and looked at him. Can you at least help me carry this to the car? She asked. No, he said. It's your mess, you deal with it. And remember, everything you leave behind will either be burned or thrown away. This includes photographs and your stuff. Would you really burn my wedding dress? She asked. My parents spent thousands on this dress. Well then, you better take it if you don't want it to burn, Tim said, sobbing. She carried the bag to her car and returned for more. Damn it, how much stuff does she have? Tim asked himself. A couple of hours later, she sat down on a bale, exhausted. I can't fit anything else in the car, she said. Can I come back later for the rest? Please, no, said Tim. You're not allowed closer than 150 meters to this place. Ask your parents to come pick it up. If you want, I'll hold off on getting rid of stuff for a few days. Thanks, Tim, I appreciate it, she said. Oh my God, I was just thinking, what am I gonna tell my parents? Try telling the truth for once, Tim said. Tell them you cheated on me with my boss and others, and I'll kick you out, no joke. Seriously, she asked. They'll disown me if I do that. Not my problem, Tim said. But I guarantee it'll be way worse if you try to make me look like the bad guy or something. You know how it is. Your folks are pissed 'cause you've been slacking off. Then there was a knock on the door. I think it's for you, Tim said. Candy trudged over to the door and opened it to find the deputy sheriff, Candace Burns. Is it me you're looking for? She asked. Got any ID? He inquired. She whipped out her driver's license and showed it to him. After checking it out, he handed it back and handed her an envelope. You've been served, ma'am, he said. There's also a court summons for you. Get out now. You can sign the divorce papers if you want. She just nodded and pulled out the papers. After flipping through them, she asked for a pen and signed. I'll give this back to the lawyer, he said. You need to go now. If you come back, you'll be arrested and sent to jail. Got it? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. She glanced back at Tim. I'm so sorry, she mumbled. Yeah, me too, Tim replied. Bye, she whispered, walking away. The deputy gave Tim a nod and then walked away. The next few days were crazy for Tim. Candy never tried to reach out to him, but Jake called his house phone twice and left some threatening messages. Damn it, Tim. I know you're there, he shouted. If you don't drop this lawsuit, I'll come and kick your ass. Tim smiled, recorded the voicemail, and sent it to Ruby, who then told the cops. Candy's parents also called, asking if they could grab some more of her stuff. Yeah, sure, Tim said. Just come on over. George said, are you sure she's not with you? She has a restraining order on her. Candy's father sighed. When Candy's mother Bernice arrived, they took Candy's stuff and tried to talk Tim out of getting a divorce. Tim, she messed up, Bernice said. But you can forgive her and take her back. She's really into you. What did she tell you? Tim asked. She said she got into a fight with your boss, Bernice replied. That's it? Tim questioned. Yeah, she didn't go into details, Bernice said. Damn, we didn't push for all the info. Tim found a bunch of pics and DVDs in an envelope and showed them to Bernice and George. They were freaking out when they saw the photos. Sorry she didn't spill all the beans, Tim said. Looks like it's way worse than she thought. Oh my God, Bernice said. I had no clue it was this bad. I'm really sorry, Tim, don't blame yourself for this mess, George said, looking furious. I'm gonna have a serious talk with our idiot daughter. Have you done anything else with those photos? He asked. Tim shook his head, not yet, but I want her to agree to the divorce, he said. They sympathized with him for a bit and then finished packing up the rest of her stuff. Half an hour later, they left the house, giving Tim a warm hug and wishing him the best. Later that day, as Tim was watching TV, there was another knock on the door. He looked through the peephole and saw Jake, Mike, and two of Tim's old co-workers. He walked into his office, grabbed the gun from the gun. Yo, so this dude pulled up with a gun, right? He called 911 and was holding the gun behind his back. He barely got the door open before these fools rushed in. They were like, we'll kick your ass, Jake, all aggressive and shit. Tim pulls out his piece and points it at Jake, making them stop. Jake's like, you ain't actually gonna shoot us, are you? You ain't got the balls. Tim's like, you wanna test me? Just so you know, I already called the cops and they're on their way. If you're still here when they show up, you're going to jail for violating the restraining order. Ah, Jake, I think he's serious. Yo, one of the other dudes said, serious, and Jake glanced at him before turning back to Tim. Right at that moment, they all heard a siren nearby and saw red and blue lights flashing. Yeah, Jake, I ain't playin' around, Tim said. They tried to leave but two big-ass cops in uniform blocked the doorway. Tim put the gun down when one of the officers told him to. These folks are breaking the restraining order, Tim explained. They busted into my crib and threatened me. Am arrested. Hey man, you got a copy of the order? Asked another cop. Tim nodded and said, I got it, officer. He grabbed an envelope from the kitchen table and handed it to the cop, who checked it out carefully. After a minute, he gave it back to Tim and then told the four guys, turn around and put your hands behind your back. The guys gave Tim a dirty look as the officers slapped handcuffs on them and read them their rights. Once they were cuffed, one of the officers asked Tim, do you have a license for this? Hey, check out this gun, Tim said, showing the officer his ID and NRA card. The officer nodded and warned him to be careful. Tim thanked him and the next few months flew by. He liked working at Empire way more than with Jake, and counseling with Rose helped him with trust and anger problems. At the same time, he started hitting the gym and working out 3 days a week. He also started taking martial arts classes, mostly for mental discipline. In addition to that, he followed a diet and exercise plan recommended by Rose. The divorce went smoothly, especially because Candy didn't fight it. But things got messy with the alienation of affection lawsuits. Ruby warned that they could get fired, and 2 of them actually did. The case against Jake caught Tim and Ruby off guard. In court they heard all the stuff from Ruby and Jake's financial statements, and the judge decided Tim was in the right and ordered Jake to cough up $1 million in damages. And let me tell you, at the end of the trial, the judge was not holding back on Jake. He straight up said, "Mr. Hudson, your behavior in this whole situation is just straight up messed up. Not only did you screw over a guy who thought you were his friend, but you also used your position as his lawyer to purposely mess up his marriage and family. And on top of all that, you kept breaking restraining orders." Man, that judge did not hold back on Jake. "I rule against you, so I'm siding with the plaintiff and ordering you to pay $1 million in damages, Your Honor." "This is totally illegal," Jake's lawyer said, getting up. "Mr. Winthrop, this court thinks Mr. Hudson's actions were not just against the law, but downright gross," the judge said. "The decision is final." "When does the payment need to be made?" Winthrop asked right away. "Unless your client wants to spend some time in jail for disrespecting the court," the judge replied. "No, Your Honor, my client will pay up," Winthrop said, as ordered, and sat back down. "Okay," said the judge, "and God help you if that check gets rejected, case is closed." He banged his gavel, ending the hearing. Jake wrote out a check and gave it to his lawyer, who then gave it to the bailiff. After the judge took note of the check, the bailiff handed it to Ruby, who then passed it to Tim. To Tim's surprise, the check was honored by the bank and it paid Ruby her share of the judgment. While working at Empire, Tim was contacted by several of Jake's clients. Word of the lawsuit seemed to spread. Tim believed Jake would go bankrupt within a year because he was messing around with another man's wife. Tim refused to date anyone because he was waiting to get divorced. He thought he'd be married until he officially ended things with his current wife. Feel free to keep seeing each other, but not long after the divorce was finalized, he went out to party with his work buddies. A couple months later, Candy's mom called him. "Hey Tim, it's Bernice. Do you have a minute?" "Sure, what's up Bernice?" he asked. "Actually, this is Candy," she said. "She just found out she's HIV positive." "I'm sorry to hear that, Bernice," Tim replied. "But honestly, I'm not shocked. We're officially divorced now, so it's not my problem. I can't do anything about it, she's not on my insurance and I'm not responsible for her." "I know Bernice said that, I was just hoping that maybe you would understand and talk to her a bit." "Well, I think I can, but I don't know what good it will do," Tim said. "Please just come and talk to her for a few minutes," Bernice begged. Tim thought for a moment before answering, "Okay, I'll come in for a few minutes." "Thank you very much," Bernice said. Tim drove up to Bernice and George's house and was shocked. "Did you see how skinny and fragile Candy looked?" She walked over to him but he just waved her away, looking sad. She sat down and asked him to join her on the couch. "You're looking good, Tim," she said. "Better than I remember. How's everything going with you?" "I'm doing okay, Candy," he replied. "New job, new friends, new perspective on life. How about you?" "Not good at all," she admitted. "You know, I'm HIV positive." "That's what your mom told me," he replied. "I'm sorry to hear that, but honestly, I'm not surprised. Do you know when you got infected?" "I think it was one of those days. I was at Jake's house that day and I ended up having unprotected sex with multiple guys." Jake asked if he knew. She shook her head and said he doesn't know yet. She said she'll have to tell him so he can get tested too, but she's sure he won't take it well. Tim said, "No, probably not." She said, "Look Tim, I just wanted to apologize to you one last time and hope that maybe you can find it in your heart to forgive me for what I did to you. I now realize that my actions ruined many lives. I could have said no at any time, but I was stupid and greedy and I let it happen. My hormones made me do something stupid and now I'm regretting it. I had a great husband and lover, but I threw it all away for something new. I know you're mad at me, and you have every reason to be, but I don't want to die without your forgiveness. Tim thought about what she said. It was the first time she owned up to her mistakes and realized the impact of her actions on others. He could still hate her, but... Tim remembered his therapy sessions with Rose, still feeling resentful towards Candy wouldn't help him move on. He nodded and said, "Okay, Candy, I forgive you." She cried while sitting in a chair. He thought about hugging her and stood up, but she waved him off. "Thank you, Tim," she said through tears, "this means more to me than you know. Listen, I want you to find a woman you can love and trust, marry her, and have children. I'm over it, I'm done. But you have your whole life ahead of you and you deserve to be happy. He told me he would do it, and if you ever just want to chat, let me know, okay?" She nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "I'll do that, Tim," she said. "Thank you for coming to talk to me. I've missed you so much these past few months." "I miss the woman I married," Tim said calmly. "By the way, how are things with Jake and Mike?" She shook her head. "It's not good," she said. "Lately, he's been really mean. He didn't take losing to you in court very well. You probably know that his business has been struggling a lot lately." "Hey, did you see that Tim asked if he physically hurt you?" She replied, "Not yet, but he's really rough." Tim then asked if she wanted him to be there when she tells him about her diagnosis. She said, "No, thanks for offering, but I have to handle this on my own. I keep thinking that if I had just kicked him out that first day of camping, we'd still be together." Tim said, "Maybe, but I have a feeling he would have shown his true colors eventually. He's been after you for a while now, I think." "You're spot on," she said. "I'm seriously exhausted and need to chill before I come back. Thanks for coming, it means a lot to me, more than you realize." "No problem," Andy replied. "And remember, call me if you need to chat or anything." "Okay," she nodded weakly. "I'll remember. Goodbye, Tim. Think of me once in a while." "Sure thing." Tim sensed a finality in her words and wondered if she was thinking of doing something drastic. "I'll think of you. Just promise me you won't do anything stupid, okay?" She smiled, "I promise. I won't." Tim got up and walked towards the door. Bernice came up to him before he left. "Thanks, Tim," she said, giving him a hug. "It means a lot to me, more than you know. And for me too." "You're welcome, Bernice," he replied. "Keep an eye on her, okay?" "I will," she promised. A couple of weeks later, Tim was chilling on his couch, eating dinner and watching the evening news when he heard a report that grabbed his attention. The bodies of a local businessman, his son, and a woman believed to be the man's mistress were found earlier today in what police think was a double murder. The presenter said that Jacob Hudson, the president and founder of Hudson Consulting, along with his son and an unidentified woman, were found dead. They were all shot. The police are looking into it and will give more info as it comes out. Tim was shocked at first, but then called Bernice. She was crying when she picked up the phone. "Bernice, what's happening?" he asked. "We just found out that Candy is dead," she said. "Looks like that jerk Jake shot her." "Man, his own son and himself, oh my God," Tim exclaimed. "I saw the news report and hoped it wasn't her." "I am so sorry, that's her," Bernice said. "Do the police have any idea why this happened?" Tim asked. "They're not completely sure," she replied, "but I think she told Jake about her HIV and he went crazy. They're conducting an autopsy now." "I'm really sorry, Bernice," Tim said. "I want you to know that I never wanted this to happen." "I know, Tim," she said. "Candy dug her own grave and now she's paying for it. Still, it's tough to lose your only. Man, I'm just glad you were able to make things right with her. I like to think she's in a better place now. Just let me know if you need anything," he said. "Thank you, Tim," she said. Candy's memorial service was held a couple of weeks later, and Tim took the day off work to be there with her parents. According to the autopsy results, both Jake and Mike, like Candy, were found to be HIV positive. From what the police were able to figure out, Candy told Jake about her diagnosis and suggested they should. So, Jake and Mike found out they got the virus too. Hudson shot his wife in the head, then his son, and finally shot himself. Tim was sad for a few days about Candy's death, remembering the good times they had together. Then one day, out of nowhere, Cynthia Stone, another co-worker, came to visit him. "Hey cowboy," she said, "wanna join us for happy hour tonight? You look like you could use some company." Tim hesitated for a moment, almost said no, but then changed his mind. "Hey, forget about what that guy said, I could really use some company right now." "Yeah, I'll come join you at Hitchhikers after work, sure," she asked with a smile. "I'll be there," he replied. "Thanks for the invite." And so the cycle of life goes on, he thought as she left. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so your second half doesn't cheat on you. And stay tuned for the next story, because this one is nothing compared to what's coming next.